Today we're buying a slab that nobody else wanted and turning it into a one-of-a-kind work of art. I got a problem. I love bad slabs. Let me explain. So a few months back, I was buying a couple slabs for this table. And while I was on GL Veneer's site trying to find the perfect piece of Claro walnut, I noticed this button. So I think on sale might be a nice way of saying slabs that nobody else wanted. And it's not that I'm cheap or that I can't resist a deal. It's that I genuinely love the slabs that most people would consider unusable. The more rough, the more cracks and holes they have, the more I love them. So when I saw 05972, I had to have it. Now, to give you an idea of what a similar but not on sale slab might look like, here's 09558. It's beautiful. And if I'm being totally honest, the extra money that you would pay for a slab like that, you probably end up saving in labor costs. But it's not always about the money. I can imagine 09558 and his friends sitting around making fun of 05972. And yeah, that doesn't sit right with me. Nah. You guys, you're pretty. Somebody will slap some hairpin legs on you and call it a day. But 05972, you will become a one-of-a-kind work of art. All right, first order of business, we need to figure out what we're dealing with here. So we already know that this slab was discounted. And the reason it was discounted was because nobody was buying it. And the reason nobody was buying it, I can say with 99% certainty, is because of this section right here. So the no-brainer, easy solution would be to just cut it off. But I really, really don't want to do that. And that's because whenever I'm building something, I like to imagine the type of person that would buy it. And for this one, I'm imagining a character that we'll call Rich Dude. Now you might be wondering, what's the difference between a normal dude, like me, and Rich Dude that might buy this table? Well, first and foremost, obviously the amount of money that they'd be willing to spend on a table. But putting that part aside, there's going to be a lot of little differences. Materials, how custom it is. But if I had to boil it down to one factor, I would go with scale. I live in a normal sized house. Rich Dude lives in a big house. And if I try to put this table in my normal house, it's going to be way too big. Meanwhile, if I put my normal coffee table in Rich Dude's house, it's going to look like doll furniture. So all of that is to say, I want to preserve as much size as possible for Rich Dude. Okay, here we've arrived at the first fork in the road, which is deciding how we're going to treat the live edge. So Claro walnut slabs have about an inch of lighter colored wood that runs along the outside, and it usually has a bunch of bug holes in it. And they actually look really good on a finished table if you're making a river style epoxy table where those edges are going to end up at the center. But here we're going to be leaving them as the outside. So I'm going to carve them away and only leave the darker, harder part of the wood. It'll just be more durable this way. Now I know that I just said that we're not making a river style table for this piece, and we're not, but we are still going to use epoxy to help stabilize everything. So here I'm prepping to pour, and this is kind of big decision time where I have to figure out how much of the bad wood we're going to keep. So you can see in this area, there's this sort of dark section, and this is what I was worried about. So I texted my buddy Cam, who actually has a little YouTube channel that he messes around with. You should give him a follow. He could use the help. Anyway, I sent him a few pictures and he suggested the key test. He said, if you can stick a key into it, it needs to go. And then he asked if I was circumcised. And you can see here that the good and bad wood both handled the key test the same. In other words, the dark wood problem is purely cosmetic. So that made me wonder if after I got everything finished, if you would even notice it. And yeah, you'll notice it. But I think I've got a good solution for that. So all in all, thanks to the key test, I'm keeping the wood. But unfortunately now I need to get a new truck. All right, with that all figured out, it's time to prep and pour our epoxy. Now, I could be wrong, but I think that a lot of people have the wrong idea about epoxy. Like Motion Pro Lab Stain, or what's that say? Motion Pro Plus 6346, who commented, "Oh wow, yet another epoxy table? I'm truly impressed." And I get it. I mean, there's a lot of gimmicky epoxy tables out there, but I don't think that that's what I'd do. I mean, take this project, for example. Without epoxy, this slab would have continued to be ignored. And there's probably a lot of slabs that would have ended up as mulch if it weren't for epoxy. Yeah, I'm talking to you, 09558. Nah, he'll be fine. But seriously, some people see a few gimmicky tables with Kawasaki green epoxy and assume that all epoxy tables are the same. Actually, there's a quote that sums it up best. Just like marble, slabs are a natural material, and therefore their popularity will persist. And when used properly, epoxy lets the slab function as furniture more easily than it could have otherwise. You know who said that? Me, when some jabroni tried to tell me that this desk was a gimmicky fad. Just kidding, he was actually really nice. But my point stands. Epoxy is great because it makes the unusable usable again. Okay, now let's fast forward a few days. The epoxy is cured and we can take everything out of the mold and figure out exactly what we want to do with that dark spot. So I'll be honest, I'm not entirely sure what this dark spot even is at this point, or how I should refer to it. I could call it the rot spot, the dark spot, maybe the wet spot. That said, based on how it feels and the way that it reacted with the epoxy, I am confident that it's not a structural issue, just a cosmetic one. So moving forward, we're just going to call it the section. So let's deal with the section. And what I decided to do was this sort of patchwork replacement technique that I've seen from a company called COC Design. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And I don't know if this is something that they invented. I would guess not. It was probably invented by somebody like 100 years ago. But that's where I saw it and I got the idea, so that's who I'm crediting. And I figure as long as everybody does that, then eventually the trail would lead to the origin. Anyway, here I'm practicing the technique a few different ways so that I can decide what way I want to do it. And there's 3 options. First, the most manual way, which is where I'm routing in the recess to the area that I want to patch. Then I can cut my, patch to size, square up the corners of my recess, and install. By the way, I just picked up the BLACKTAIL Studio Damascus marking knife. Very nice. Very sharp. As in, cool. And marks a nice crisp line, I guess. Anyway, the next and second way is exactly the same, except that rather than squaring up my corners, I'm going to round off the corners on the patch. And finally, the third way, try to automate the entire thing with the CNC. So I think that all 3 options are good. And if you were only going to do a few patches one time, I would say that option 1's the way to go. But I wanted to waste a bunch of time and see if I could come up with a system that I can use again in the future, just in case this is something that I really like and want to do moving forward. So I did a bunch of testing to dial everything in. And honestly, this gets really technical and I don't think that many people will be interested in it. So I'm not going to go into the technical details of this part. And instead what I'll say is, I actually don't think that the technical part of the process is the hard part. It is time consuming for sure, but it's fairly straightforward. And the good thing with these patches, no matter how you're doing them, is if you do mess them up, you can always fix it by just making the patch bigger. So really the hard part, at least for me, was deciding how to do it tastefully. And I think this is something that probably just gets easier with time. You know, you kind of learn what works, what doesn't. But this being my first time, I really labored over this part. So I guess I can't really say how to do it tastefully, but I think a good general rule of thumb or workflow is that you start with large patches and then you kind of work your way down using smaller and smaller patches in maybe 4 or 5 sessions. And really just kind of take it one patch at a time. You know, decide what wood you want to put where. Do you want it to camouflage or blend in, or do you want to highlight a patch? I mean, it's all subjective. And again, I think it's just something that you got to learn through time. Okay, still a lot of work to do on the top, but let's start working on the base. And I actually think that's going to be the cooler part of this piece once everything is said and done. So I came up with a bunch of rough ideas, and this was the first that I really gravitated towards. So with this one, I'm leaning into the fact that the slab has a wider end and a narrower end. And I really like this design, but I kept coming back to this one. There's just something about this kind of shape that I'm a sucker for. Now, I will say that I am slightly concerned that I could be building a diving board with this design. But if you're a longtime watcher of this channel, you'll know that Sean and I have used this basic shape in several projects. And I would say that the core inspiration comes from the cantilever designs of George Nakashima, who, let's be honest, I'm pretty sure knew what he was doing. Also, I know from experience that this shape can actually be very strong. That said, this one is significantly longer than those previous designs, so I think I'm just going to start putting it together, not worry about it, and if it's something that needs to be addressed, I think I've got a good solution. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do is make myself some templates. I've got all the key dimensions from my model in my drawing here, and I'm just going to use every tool at my disposal to replicate that shape on some MDF at scale. So you can see I've got tape measures, a bunch of rulers and angle guides, a track saw that I'm using as a straight edge, and my trusty brass chunky mechanical pencil, which not only is back in stock, but comes in 2 new colors that I'm unofficially calling Matte Le Black and Rich Dude Silver. Now I should mention that the new colors are going to be extremely limited, 200 of the silver and 300 of the black. So if you're interested, don't wait around. Link in the description. Now, speaking of Rich Dude, I think I got something that he's going to like. So this table being pretty big, I bought some extra thick 12-quarter walnut for the base. And I think Rich Dude will enjoy that because it's pretty ripe for some obvious thick wood jokes. But cringy cocktail banter aside, I think this design has something else that Rich Dude's going to appreciate even more. And actually, I think it's something that's appreciated universally. So the thing with Rich Dude is it comes in all shapes and sizes. Okay, well, maybe they're all a little the same. But they all like different things. Wyatt likes whiskey, while Bradford likes bourbon. But there is one universal thing that they all respond to. In fact, everybody responds to this. And that is impact. If you only have one takeaway from this video, this is it. If you want to make and sell original designs, don't focus on making pretty things. Focus on making impactful things. And that's because pretty is subjective, but impact isn't. Okay, so what do I mean by impact? Think of it like a statement piece or a conversation starter. Something that commands attention the moment that you walk into a room. You might love it, you might hate it, but you will have an opinion. The Cybertruck, perfect example. Everyone has an opinion on the aesthetics of a Cybertruck. Compare that to an F-150, a great truck, but most people don't have a strong opinion about its design. Now, if you were to conduct a poll, there's a good chance that the classic design of an F-150 might score higher in general appeal than the polarizing look of a Cybertruck. And the F-150 probably outsells the Cybertruck like 10-1. But here's the thing. I'm not trying to sell the most furniture. I'm only making one of these tables. And if there was only one Cybertruck that existed, it would sell for way more than any F-150 ever could. So it doesn't matter if 11 out of 12 rich dudes think this is the ugliest table that they've ever seen. I just need one who loves it. And by the way, rich dude definitely drives a Cybertruck. Come on. Okay, at the moment, we've got 2 big chunks of wood that we've cut here, here, and here. And next we want to join them together with a really strong connection, and I'm going to use a big floating tenon. So if you're not familiar with that, this is a variation on a classic joint called a mortise and tenon. A mortise is basically like a slot or a hole, and then the tenon is the part that goes into the... Rich dude, come on, settle down. As I was saying, the tenon goes into the mortise. So with the floating variety, you have 2 holes, and then a loose or floating tenon that connects everything. Sorry about him. So to cut it, I'm going to make a jig and use my router. And this is a pretty simple jig with a hole and a fence. That way I can clamp it to my workpiece and consistently cut the same slot centered on the joint face. So you can probably tell from all the drawings and dimensions that I show in these videos that I'm big on modeling everything in detail and keeping lots of notes and drawings to help me stay on track while I'm planning and building a project. And I'm using a free tool here called Milanote to help me do that. So you know when an investigator is trying to crack an unsolved mystery and they have a wall with photos and notes and a bunch of string? Well, think of Milanote as a digital version of that. Except instead of suspects, you got drawings, notes, to-do lists, links, and all your ideas organized in a visual way. For this project, I started up by setting up a main board with subboards for the top and base and a couple high-level to-do lists. Then within those subboards, I laid out my initial ideas, added comments, kept my 3D files, and as things progressed, I could keep adding subboards, notes, and I basically created my own personal woodworking plan so that I could maintain a clear overview of the entire build. And it's super easy. You can start with their templates, like a project plan, or from a blank canvas. Then just drag and drop your notes, copy and paste pictures, add arrows, to-do lists, and links, and it keeps everything organized and accessible. And Milano also really shines when it comes to collaboration. My wife and I have been planning a kitchen remodel, and it's been awesome for sharing boards and gathering feedback all in one spot. So if this sounds like something that you think could help you out, Milano is free to use and has no time limit. So check it out. Just use the link below and sign up. And thank you, Milano, for sponsoring this video. All right, so we've got our big mortises cut, and now I'm going to make the big tenon that's going to go into them. And I feel pretty confident in this joint. I think it's going to be very strong. I mean, I'm not going to test it, and any structural engineers can feel free to chime in here. But I would bet that if you took this whole piece after the glue were dried and put an increasing amount of weight in this area, the wood would snap somewhere around here before it would break here. And it's always a good sign with a joint when, even without glue, you have trouble taking it apart. And I definitely struggled to get this one apart when I was doing my dry assembly. When we last saw the slab, we'd finished installing our patches, and then off camera I poured a little bit more epoxy into some of the leftover voids. And next we need to touch up the still remaining voids, first with some hot melt, and then with some CA glue. So as you already know, this slab was discounted. And earlier I mentioned that I would get into the financials, so let's do that now. So this piece cost just over $1,000. And a slab like 09558 would cost almost double, about $850 more. And let me be really clear about this next point. Buying the cheaper slab from a purely financial point of view is a bad decision. I would say I've spent about 10 extra hours on this slab to make it usable, so I've essentially lost the discount in labor costs alone. Plus, the market for a slab like this, compared to something like 09558, is definitely smaller. So if your goal with making a table like this was to maximize profit, I think you're better off buying the prettiest, cleanest slab possible, add a nice metal base, and move on. Let the beauty of the slab be the star of the show. So the other day, somebody left me a really nice comment. They said that they thought that my projects were nice and that I'm a talented designer and woodworker. Yeah, there's a but coming. But that my constant pseudo-intellectual chatter is unbearable and that I should just play some background music. And in the past, I probably would have clapped back at this guy. But I thought, you know what? Maybe he's got a point. And if everybody thinks that, maybe I am doing myself a disservice by talking in these videos. So I decided I would ask all of you in a poll. So I shared the comment along with two options. Option 1, I completely change what I'm doing, make videos I'm less interested in making, jeopardize my ability to provide for my family, hope I somehow pick the right background music that is magically loved universally, and completely eliminate the ability for people who do like the talking to experience it. Or option 2, he can mute me and put on whatever background music he likes. And the results came back 82% in favor of option 2, which honestly, I thought it would have been even more of a landslide. But I think most of the people who clicked option 1 did it sarcastically or by accident based on all the DMs I got. A few of you also wrote in some suggestions for a third option. Either way, to that commenter, sorry, but the people have spoken, and I'll continue to as well. Enjoy your bag of d***s. Their words, not mine. By the way, I conducted that poll on a different platform, so there's probably a good chance that you didn't get to voice your opinion. So if you want to vote here, if you like the talking, give this video a like, and if you don't like the talking, give it a dislike. And if you're not already subscribed, go ahead and do that too. And if you are subscribed, I thank you. Seriously. Okay, so building furniture. That's what we're here to talk about, right? Well, you just saw me using my templates and router to create that main central shape of the base. And if you've watched my videos, you've seen me do that dozens of times. And now I've got a couple other templates here for my feet pieces, or foot pieces, these pieces. Reese's Pieces. Anyway, for these, I'm going to show you why making templates can still be really useful, even if you're using a table saw to shape everything. So we're starting here with our workpieces milled to their final thickness, which is 1.5 inches. Then I can use my template to set the fence on my table saw to the final width, and after that, cross-cut them the same way. So at this point, I would have rectangles that are the same size as my templates, just missing all the angles. But those we can cut on the table saw as well, using a piece of scrap plywood as a sled. So we'll make the big feet first, and we're going to need 4 of them. So what I do is take my template and place it so that the first angle that I want to cut is flush with the edge that I just cut on my sled. And I'm going to attach a fence to lock in that angle. Then I'm going to take a stop block and attach it so that my workpiece consistently ends up in the exact same position. And to make this safe and keep my hands away from the blade, I'm going to use another piece of plywood as a bridge clamp like you see here. And now we can make our first cut. Next, I'll flip that piece around 180 degrees and cut the opposite side. Then with that done, I'm going to switch over to the other workpiece and repeat the exact same cuts. Okay, now we're going to switch the placement of our fences so that we can cut the angles on the ends of our feet. And once we've done that, the workpiece will match the template identically. So here's a time lapse of me doing the entire process again on the smaller feet. And doing this whole thing took me about 8 minutes. And what's really cool is, say this were a piece that I did want to mass produce, like an F-150, and 6 months later another order came in and I needed to make another one, I could actually make and save the sled jig like this and not have to set up anything. I could just use that sled again to make all the same cuts. Now, the final thing that I need to do on these pieces is use my crosscut sled to turn them into 4 individual pieces for each foot that have a 90-degree joint face. That way we can attach them to the main shape. But before we do that, there's one detail that I want to put onto that main shape right now. And that's going to be this super big roundover detail that runs along the vertical edge here. Hey, what's Star Wars about? That was my attempt at a hook to make you as interested in this next part as I am, because this is my favorite part of this video. And it isn't because attaching feet is particularly fun, but because, how do I put this? So when it comes to explaining things, on the extreme ends of the spectrum, you've got 2 kinds of people. Oversimplify guy and gatekeeper guy. And if you ask both of them what Star Wars is about, gatekeeper guy might say something like, it's about the hero's journey interwoven with complex political allegories and the dichotomy of good versus evil through the lens of a space opera. While oversimplify guy would say, people fighting with glowing sticks. And I mean, both are technically right, but not great answers for most people. So the reason that I love these parts is I look at them as a challenge to explain how to do something properly, in this case attaching a few feet in a metal bar, without oversimplifying it to a point where a person who wanted to do the same thing would be unequipped to handle it, and without complicating it to the point where people would just want to give up before they ever tried. So you saw me measure and mark where I wanted my feet to attach. And then what I did was transfer that line up and onto the opposite side of the base, and I marked a center line on all of my feet. Then I could cut in a couple domino mortises for each joint, and dowels or pocket screws would work just as easily here as well. Now we're going to hold off on attaching these for a minute while we figure out the brass bar situation, because otherwise they're just going to get in the way. So functionally, this table needs the extra support. Again, I don't think that it would break, but my fear of building a diving board came true. So I bought this piece of brass bar with a 1/2 inch diameter, and this is really going to stiffen things up. Now it would be way easier to install the bar like this, but this looks cooler. So we'll do that. Which means I need to drill a perfectly sized hole that goes all the way through the piece and bridges this gap with perfect placement. Now this piece is way too big to try to do that on the drill press. So I made this little jig that I could use to drill at a repeatable 15-degree angle. And then I remembered wait a minute, my Rockler drill guide can tilt, so I'm going to use that. And this is a perfect example of a misconception that a lot of people have, which is the bigger your project is, the bigger tool you need, when it's often the opposite. Big parts require small tools and small parts require big tools. Like when I'm making a cut on a slab, most of the time I can't use my table saw. I use a circular saw. But if I needed to cut out a small patch, it would be dangerous to use a circular saw, so I'll use my table saw. Honestly, if you made me pick between only having the drill guide or my big drill press, I'd take the guide, and I can think of a couple thousand reasons why. Anyway, to drill the hole, I started by marking exactly where the bar would exit the top side of the piece. Then I clamped on my drill along with a piece of scrap wood where the bit would exit the workpiece on the underside to prevent it from blowing out. Okay, next we're going to take the brass bar and cut it to length, but it's going to be nearly impossible for me to hit the exact length that it would need to be with the proper angles. So I'm going to cut it where it falls somewhere in this range. And then I'm going to polish it for two reasons. First, I'm going to need to polish it eventually to make it look nice. But second, right now it's a 1/2 inch diameter and so is the hole, which means it would be pretty hard to take it in and out. And this will make it a tiny bit smaller so that it can slide in and out easily. And the reason that we want that is, next we're going to go ahead and install it so that we can mark the center line of exactly where it needs to enter the bottom piece. Now the problem here is that I can't actually drill into this face because there's no way to fit the drill. So now I need to transfer that line around to the other side at that 15-degree angle. And then I can use the same setup as we did before to drill in the second hole. And if I did it all the right way, bingo. Now to make this thing strong, I need to have it be trapped inside. So on the underside, I'm going to cut this patch that'll act as a barrier. And you might be thinking, won't the ground be a barrier? And no, because eventually this thing's going to have some leveling feet. So depending on how flat the floor is, in all likelihood, there's going to be a tiny gap between this part and the floor. So now I can use some epoxy to install the bar so that it's pushed up against our little patch barricade. And then on the top side, I'm going to fill the void with a 1/2 inch diameter wooden dowel. Now, I probably could have just used dowel on both sides, but I think that the barricade is stronger and it gives me a little more peace of mind on the underside. And on the top side, I'm not concerned because the top is going to be flush up against the slab once everything's done. So nowhere for it to go. Now, moving back over to the feet, there aren't as many tricks here. You already saw how we're going to attach them. So really the only obstacle is clamping. And you really don't want to clamp onto a crisp, sharp edge like this for a couple reasons. First is you're going to damage it pretty badly. And second, you would only be able to get one clamp on it. So all of the pressure would be on this side, which would cause the geometry to want to be like this instead of perfectly flat how we want it. So I made these little clamping cauls out of some plywood where the angle is a pretty close match to the angle on the ends of the piece. Doesn't have to be a perfect match. And it also has these little relief spots so that there's no pressure on the tip of the point. And it lets me get clamps on the top and bottom side so that I can adjust the clamping force until everything's nice and even. So to summarize this section, oversimplify guy would tell you, what's the big deal? You just drill some holes and stick everything together. And he's technically right. But he probably also can't build a nice project to save his life. Whereas gatekeeper guy would take something like this that is slightly complicated, and rather than demystifying it, he'd convolute it to the point where you'd feel confused and he'd feel superior. But the truth is always in the middle. It is hard, but only because you don't know what to do. And once you do, it's simple. Have you seen Pulp Fiction? It's good. It tells a bunch of interconnected stories that are presented out of order and has really good dialogue and humor. But I will warn you, it's pretty dark and violent. Now, are you more likely to want to watch it after hearing that description, or that it's a postmodern neo-noir film that deconstructs narrative structure, blending nonlinear storytelling with meta-commentary on genre tropes which subvert cinematic expectations? Yeah. Or you could say it's about a couple guys who stumble into a pawn shop and, You know what? Never mind. But if you want to build something that looks complex and isn't, do me a favor and check out our woodworking plans. I really think they're the best out there and you'll enjoy them. And no pressure. All right, the next thing that we need to do is drill some oversized holes for our attachment hardware. And this will keep everything secure while still allowing for wood movement throughout the seasons. And doing this is going to be really similar to what you've already seen. So let's have some fun and mess with Dolores.
Yeah.
What do you think of this setup? Do you think this will be okay? So I have to make a hole that goes through.
Oh.
But I can't do it from the underside because then it'll be at an angle. So I have to reference off this, but I don't want it to. So I went on to explain how my concern is making sure that I can drill through the base without getting tear out. And essentially I'm asking her if she thinks that this setup that I got going here looks like it's going to do the trick. It exits the piece.
Then I think that should be fine.
Okay. I'm glad I got your seal of approval.
Why would you want me?
I don't know. You know what you're doing with this stuff. I don't know how to build stuff.
Are you recording me?
Yeah. Okay. That was fun. And we're officially on the home stretch here. All that's left to do is install all of the attachment hardware so that after we sand and finish everything, we can attach the two and sand and finish everything. And to finish, I'm going to be using sample 73. So if you didn't already know, this is the wood finish that I've been working on for about a year now, and it's finally about to release. And I have an admission. The reason that this whole finishing project started in the first place had nothing to do with the finish itself. It was the can. I don't like these cans. I always end up with a bunch of the finish inside skinning over and going to waste. And when it comes to the accelerator, I can't even get it out of the can to begin with. I also always thought it was funny that the metal cans hold 275 milliliters of the finish and 75 milliliters of the accelerator. So if you're doing the 3-to-1 ratio that's suggested, it's not even the right amount. So you would end up with 50 milliliters of finish that has no accelerator. So that's what planted the seed. I wanted a better bottle. 300 milliliters of finish and 100 milliliters of accelerator that shouldn't skin over and is easy to get out. I figured if that was the only improvement that we made, we'd have a winner. But, while we're at it, why not go ahead and improve what's on the inside too? But, I'm going to talk more about that in a different video. I don't want to turn this into an infomercial. If you do want to learn more about it though, and maybe order a bottle, I'll put a link in the description. All right. So I feel like I should apologize to Rich Dude. We did a lot of making fun of him in this video. And I think it's important to remember that Rich Dude is a fictional character. I mean, I'm sure that there are some people out there that are kind of similar to him, but certainly not every rich dude is like that. So to close, I would like to do the honest thing and separate fact from fiction. What you already know is that this table is way too big for me to use. So I'm putting it up for sale. And to buy it, you don't need to be rich. I mean, it is a pretty expensive table, so it might not hurt. But I'm not going to be checking W-2s or anything like that. In fact, you don't even need to be a dude. You don't need to drive a Cybertruck. You don't need to be the kind of person who makes creepy jokes at cocktail parties. Basically, this table is available to whoever wants it and is willing to pay for it. If you're the kind of person that appreciates the story of a slab that nobody else wanted and went on to become a one-of-a-kind work of art, maybe this is the one for you. Or maybe you want something a little more pristine. If that's the case, I think I know the perfect slab for you. And my saws and I would love to meet him. Get a hold of me and we'll talk. Thanks for watching.